like we've got a few folks who are joining. Um, in the interest of time, we want to go ahead and get started. Today's session, this CX on the Rocks Collective, it'll be led by myself and Matt. We're going to talk to you a little bit about strategy and culture. And I'm sure that's something that's probably near and dear. But I want to put a plug in for the collective, make sure that this is a learning lab. This is a workshop. This is where you bring your problems, your issues, the things that are maybe keeping you up at night or just a pebble in your shoe, for lack of a better term, in your business. So this gives you an opportunity to bring those problems here. We'll talk about it. We've got a team of consultants who are here to help. And if you haven't joined the collective, please ensure that you do that today because there's a lot of great stuff here. So again, our topic today is strategy and culture. Before we get started, Matt, you want to introduce yourself? Give your elevator pitch?
Thanks, JP. It's good to see some folks again and some new folks. I'm Matt. I'm the host of the CX and Culture Connection podcast, and I have a book by the same name. And I was the founder of Journey Spark Consulting. I was at PwC and Booz before that for many years, focused on the intersection of CX strategies and culture, and launched my own firm to focus more on leadership coaching and helping folks work that intersection in their roles as CX leaders.
Awesome, Matt. And I could just say I'm JP, but a little bit more than that. Spent more than 2+ decades at some pretty large firms, with my specialty being contact centers and customer experience, obviously. Um, Founder, principal of CX and growth strategies, and also have a podcast, which is Confessions of a CX Executive, which is basically a collection of all the mistakes I've made so you don't have to. So anyway, let's go ahead and jump into today's discussion. I want to kind of tee this up for the group. Um, Before we get started, does anyone have any particular hot button items around strategy or culture that they want to tackle? All right. So it sounds like we don't have anything. So I want to ask this question, or rather position this piece. Companies don't often hire us or other consultants to necessarily fix their strategy or their culture, because everyone has a great culture. And I think we've all worked at those sort of organizations where nothing's wrong with the culture. But there are some symptoms where strategy and culture gaps show up. And so tell me if this scenario sounds familiar, because I really like to get audience participation here. We present a report or dashboard and we can't all agree on the numbers. Does that sound familiar? So love to hear a discussion around that. How do we harmonize the numbers when that happens? I mean, well, who is the ultimate arbiter of truth in that sort of situation? So I'll kick it over to Matt, then I'll kick it to the group, because I'd love to hear about this, because this is essentially a strategy break that happens in the business.
I think a related question, JP, is, are the executives looking at similar metrics? So the question is it the same number is different? And you're asking a question about what's the source of truth, like what is our customer growth, or what's our customer retention, or what's our loyalty, or you know, um, or is it more like that people are focused on different metrics and you want to get alignment around how to measure progress? I think both are relevant issues
Yes.
around getting alignment, but I do think, sometimes the data is different just because, like, what's the definition of retained revenue? There's actually multiple definitions, but there are many permutations of that. So just getting people aligned on it is important.
Absolutely, because to that point, if we don't have that alignment and we have what we think is a universally understood metric, then that's where we run into issues. So it becomes not just an issue of, is the number wrong, but to your point, how are you tracking that? How are you measuring that? And more importantly, what behaviors are happening in the business that are supposed to drive whatever it is that we say this is supposed to happen? So love to hear from the group.
Hello, good to
Yeah.
see you again. I'm
Hey,
Roseanne
Roseanne.
Hartfield. I can share an example from my work at American Express where exactly what Matt said happened. I led a marketing organization that also worked in partnership with commercial sales. A lot of our marketing efforts are evaluated by long-term value or net present value. And the sales organization is really focused on like the first 13 months. So there was the first disconnect in that the way we evaluated campaigns and the way they evaluated their success was already in conflict. And so that was one of those moments where we had different scorecards and then really had to dig into the underlying systems that were providing us those metrics to expand the dashboard or the scorecard to say, we look at the business differently. This is why, right? I mean, from marketing perspective, we make investment decisions based on a 5-year lifetime value. And the decisions made by sales are a different cycle or a different time frame. So in many ways, it was an education process to help bring, because our goal was to bring organizations together or functions together to create a unified customer experience. And that was one of the first things that we encountered, was that their systems were telling them different numbers. So they even had a different view on what was working.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'll put a fine point on it. This sort of thing shouldn't be left to interpretation. Okay. These are numbers, these are metrics in the business. So love that example. Anyone else would like to share? So I bring up this point for the simple reason is that when we think about CX being on the rocks, we think about, in many businesses, there's this period of evaluation of what does CX and CX practitioners and leaders bring to the table. So if we're not clear on the definitions and we're not unified on the scorecard, how do we as leaders accurately reflect the value that we drive to the business? So who's encountered that and would love to hear how you're solving that? And more importantly, again, what is the fix, and how do we go out into the world and evangelize that message? Because we don't have the same kind of conversations around sales and marketing as Rosanna, you and I talked about. This is really around, if customer experience is a force multiplier for revenue, we've got to be clear on how we measure. And then more importantly, we have to be aligned on what that looks like and be able to articulate it. So who wants to pick up the ball and run with it?
I can contribute a little following Roseanne and some of the examples that you gave in terms of sometimes the role that marketing plays on attracting on new prospects or customers, is that marketing doing an investment on branding, on positioning, on campaigns, and generate the proper conditions to attract those leads, but or create the relationship with potential customers. But then their responsibility ends there. So other teams has to pick up that information and connect with those leads and or prospects in a specific time and manner, because if marketing do the whole effort, and then the team that needs to connect them connected or resolve a problem that it was identified, they do that 2-3 weeks after, all those efforts were a waste of time and effort. So that's why there needs to be a coordination and alignment between all the different departments involved on that customer relationship. And because if not, yes, you are wasting time and investment on doing things that are not correlated.
No, Ariel, you hit the nail on the head. It's actually swimming further upstream than just what the dashboard says. It's driving that alignment, and Matt touched on that as well. But it really becomes strategically, how does that handoff work? Because we all play a role in driving the right type of experience. So for example, if I were to pick on my friends for marketing, I would say, are we targeting the right customer? Is this the right ICP for our business? Not just who we market to that comes in the door, but does our solution meet the needs of that customer? Those are two different things that are happening there, right? So we need to be clear, because that also lends itself to the right solution, lends itself to lifetime value, to retention, and all of that. So it can't just be a front end metric that says number of sales, impressions, pipeline, and all of that, but the bulk of the effort comes on the back end. And that really tells us if we've gotten it right. But there's got to be that handoff to say, okay, we targeted them. Now we're going to onboarding, and now we're moving them through the funnel. How do we all speak the same language? And when we get to the dashboard, have the same common measure of success?
What to add to this, like I think one challenge a lot of people on this call or watching in the recording later probably share related to this is that a lot of things related to CX happen in a fragmented way across the organization because there's many stakeholders that touch it, and they all may have all different metrics they care about. So unless you've invested the time as a CX leader to kind of bring those stakeholders together and define a set of shared metrics that the C-suite buys into, what often happens is you have ad hoc efforts that are not lasting, where you build a business case and then there are other business cases and other business cases, and they're not consistent in the way they're doing things. And they're not ongoing measures of value realization. And if the only measure of ongoing impact is something like NPS or CSAT or CES, those have loose linkages to business outcome measures that you have to invest time to establish for your own company, because using them as benchmarks of value creation are very loose. And rather you have to link it to your own business value metrics and not govern your progress purely off of a measure like from a survey score. Otherwise you end up playing whack-a-mole, just chasing improvement
right.
efforts. Yeah.
But I want to pull on a string here with something that you mentioned. It is about, you said CX driving that alignment to the C-suite level, just making sure we have that alignment. My question is that the role of CX? We can, I would say you can argue it either way. Like, is there the alignment at the C-suite to say each of you owns a piece of CX, and here is your primary metric that reflects that, in addition to all the other things that your bonus is going to be based on, if we're being honest? Or is it CX's advocacy through the business to say, here's our point of view on the things that matter? Thoughts?
I love that idea. I remember at one point there was a town hall where there was a presentation that the head of product, the head of sales, the head of marketing, and the head of service showed the full life cycle and what was important to them, but also what was the alignment or the handoff between each function. And that was the first time I had seen it from a customer perspective in the commercial side of the business, because the consumer side of the business had already advanced in that. But that was the first time that I saw a sort of a unified view from the customer's point of view, and where, like in the scenario they presented, it was this is a win. But there were also scenarios where they said, okay, here's where it breaks, right? And these are the things, these have now become the new priorities. But it was like a moment that I had not seen at a town hall, where it brought it all together, and it showed those 5 or 6 people who owned and evaluated their success at different parts of the life cycle in partnership.
That's right. Because I'm of the opinion, whether informed or otherwise, that there's a lot of organizations that operate on the latter, meaning that it's CX's role to have to evangelize why this matters and drive the alignment in the business, where it really needs to be CX as an advocate at the C-suite level to drive the alignment where possible, so that everyone else falls in line, as you mentioned, sales, marketing, product, engineering, whomever, right? And to drive that part of the business. So this is why when we talk about practical strategies, we really need to think about what problem are we trying to solve here for the customer, and it's that unification, so that there's clear handoff and it doesn't become CX has to solve the world's problems here. And so that leads me to another point here, because we don't have that alignment. Then let's talk about what I call the elephant in the room, which covers both um, strategy and culture, is this whole notion of silent churn. And what I mean by that is that these are customers that leave us without ever having engaged, which highlights so many breaks within the business. So is that so? How would you tackle that? Customers never engage with you and they leave. How would you all tackle that whole churn cycle?
Have we engaged with them?
Yeah.
What's that?
And you mentioned they haven't engaged with us. The same, a
Yeah,
corollary would be,
exactly.
have we engaged with them at all?
It's exactly. And what does that mean? Is it they've decided to seek another solution and now the panic sets in and says, lack of a better term, baby, baby, please don't leave? Or is there a proactive strategy to understand the signals? Like, so for example, low adoption rates, when we look at customers not using the product, or number of complaints, all of those different issues, like how do we use those signals where they haven't formally necessarily told us they were leaving, but there were enough quote unquote breadcrumbs along the way for us to recognize the problem if we were more proactive?
JP, related to this, it's a two-way street. From the work I've done in loyalty, originally with like retailers on loyalty programs, and later with like healthcare and financial services, and even B2B, building customer success, building out more experience-based loyalty programs. There's a repeated pattern, which is the way you engage the customer, let's say the first 90 days after they sign up, whether it's a loyalty program at a credit card or retailer, or first post 90-day enrollment for a health plan, the way people engage there actually sets the table, or in software, the way they engage at the beginning of the rollout for customer lifetime value. And if you don't engage them in the first 90 days and get them to engage, you end up with way lower customer lifetime value. So if people were leaving without ever engaged, I would ask, what did we do in the first 90 days to engage them?
But I think that also goes back to our original question about the alignment, the handoff, and what do we see in the metrics? Because if I'm in customer success, yeah, I know what the signals are because I end up having to clean it up. But when I see the tickets pile up from a product perspective, do I make the same connection? If I see my conversion dropping in sales, or my funnel is dropping in marketing, am I seeing these as signs of potential churn, or our message isn't resonating, or things like that in the marketplace? So I would challenge the team to say, outside of a formal CX role, is there alignment on what a churn signal looks like? And then how would that be measured?
I think that, and I'm going to talk about my experience in B2B. I think that sometimes, well, in B2B, sales is the area who has the most close relationship with that customer, and who are in contact let's say, on a daily basis, and
right.
they listen that the feedback from that customer. The problem is that if the people from the sales department first communicate those concerns, those complaints internally to other department, and if they do that, if they are listened, because sometimes until they don't treat that customer doesn't threaten to leave the company, they are not listened about fixing the problems that particular customer is facing. So sometimes I think in B2B overall, I think sales plays a critical role on listening and receiving those kind of signals that you were mentioning, JP, about problems that arise or that customers is facing.
What you're highlighting with the cultural linkage, Ariel,
Yes.
to bring it to a cultural linkage, is
Yep.
Culture is about behavior.
Yeah.
And the linkage of CX to culture is that the moments that matter in your customer journey, the peaks and the troughs, are where human behavior impacts that experience and creates the peak very often. And if sales is interacting or other frontline employees interacting, do they ask the right questions? Do they act on that? Do they share insights back? Like those are actually behaviors around the way they show up, the way they ask questions, the way they do things. And you're not waiting for the survey that 6% of people fill out later, or the vast majority never fill out. So in fact, your frontline employees are much more of a data signal than your survey will ever be. And you need a culture where there's conversation and collaboration and there's, curiosity to kind of solve those issues, that people see it as their responsibility to work on it versus waiting for the numbers to come back later.
Yeah, and it has to be a systematic approach to it, right? It can't just be what we tend to see with surveys, an overcorrection because someone had a negative experience. And so now all of a sudden we're fixing something that isn't typical in the business. And so we run that risk. And also you got to be able to do it at scale. I mean, that's the piece that matters the most. It says, okay, what are the top 3 signals that we are seeing across our various groups? And then more importantly, who owns addressing that? Because I say, okay, sales is going to onboard and we got a great relationship with the customer, but we ship the product with the defect that's driving these issues in customer success. How does that linkage happen? How do we say correct this and have the culture that says we've got so many defects per product shipped? That's your first signal. And then now you've got to address it, because this isn't a sales, this isn't a customer success issue. This is a product. This is the actual thing that the customer uses that we have to get right. And that's your first line in churn, using that example.
Yeah, JP, can you hear me okay?
I can.
Yeah, hey, this is Van. Yeah, hey, I was just thinking, I wanted to kind of just tack on to what Matt was saying. I was thinking back on a project I did with a consulting firm in consumer goods, and we actually developed something we called it EWAS, right? So it's early warning and retention.
Mm-hmm.
And the whole idea of it was to track behaviors from the customer. And it created a report that we would give to our frontline associates who were actually face to face with that customer on a daily basis. So they could look at it and say, wow, this customer hasn't bought XYZ in like the last 2 cycles. That's a flag. Or
right.
They stopped payment. That's a flag.
But
the other part of it that I didn't hear Matt, yeah, right. The other part that I didn't hear Matt talk about was there was a tremendous amount of training, because the people who are making these deliveries, these are people driving trucks for a living, right?
Yeah.
So you have to make sure they're equipped to have that conversation. And I think to your point as well, JP, what questions are they asking people? Are they saying, hey, is everything okay? Or are they diving deeper and getting to the root of what might be going on with that customer?
That's right.
And what we found was when we did that training with those folks and taught them how to ask good questions, how to be more curious, and how to get at some of those root cause issues, that they could correct them before they became visible to anybody else. At that point, it's just a thing in the back of the mind, right? With the customer, they're like, yeah, I'm not so sure the value's there, until somebody starts paying attention. And I think the problem is when you wait for it to get to the call center, or whatever support function you have for that, it's too late.
That's right. That's right. It's culturally, like, how do you create the environment where people move from, I don't do windows because, that's the purview of CX, to, this is in my wheelhouse. This is within my scope. I have a point of view. I may not necessarily engage, but I can pass a signal along because we're seeing it happen enough. I see Lynn came on camera, so I think there's a point of view coming up.
And real quick, because we're talking about culture and strategy, it was the mind shift from the front line was to not be drivers anymore. They were actually customer service ambassadors, or whatever you want to call them. But their job was not to deliver the product. That was the result of them doing strategically what we wanted to do, which was create a truly amazing customer experience for each and every customer they had.
Oh man,
Brilliant.
you're touching
Brilliant.
on something that I know we don't have time for, but the whole notion of I can't do it because it's policy.
Yeah.
But that's going to be
Yeah.
another discussion for another day. But Lynn, I did want to give you an opportunity, and thanks for sharing, Van.
So I'm looking around at my room that I'm in, and everything in this room is important to me. Some things are very important to me, like this microphone, this mouse, this computer, this chair, right? I rely on these every day, every minute of the day. Frankly, for none of these things did I have an engagement with the manufacturer. And for all of the purchases I made, it was a fleeting engagement with the retailer.
Yep.
However, because they are meeting my needs and they have not failed to require me to waste my time, so-called waste my time, being in a support queue and listening to music and whatnot, I'll recommend them. I recommend them all the time. I'll rebuy the same brands mostly, right? So the key in those cases for products that, and even services that are not requiring an engagement per se, right? You're not on premises. It's more the product itself. I think the key for the CX team is to do expectations research on a fairly regular basis. Expectations research is also known as qualitative, but here you're investigating what's changed in how people think, right? So we noticed that before the pandemic, people thought a little differently, and after the pandemic, they think differently. Even the CX people that I serve in my business, I'm still trying to figure out what the hell are they thinking differently. I hit the nail on the head in some ways. In other ways, I'm just so baffled and like it's not working like it used to work. So expectations research is so key to keep your entire organization in sync. If we're not researching expectations and then trying to find those crystal clear patterns and watchwords that are simple for every nook and cranny of your company to embrace and to remember throughout their day, am I helping or hindering those couple of watchwords, right? Now you're driving an in-sync culture that's going to create the products and the policies and the processes that makes it, well, less costly. I'm not creating costs for my mouse maker. I'm not creating costs for my microphone maker or my laptop maker. Because if I was contacting them, that would be generating costs for them. Right? But as long as they're still in sync with what's important to me, the next time I'm buying one of these products, they've got me. So,
Absolutely.
yeah.
Well,
That's
and
great,
I
great
can I
feedback.
just add something to that, JP? Because I mean, the one thing I'm hearing is, yeah, I mean, because I used to hear that, I hear the exact same thing all the time. It's like customers would tell us, hey, if there's something wrong, we'll let you know about it. It's kind of what you're saying. It's like, hey, I bought a chair, I sit in it, it supports me, it does what it's supposed to do. That was kind of their mentality. If you're doing what it is you told me you were going to do, that's great. But invariably, something breaks. And
It's going to
recovery
happen.
is the crucial part when something breaks, right? How do you recover? How well do you recover? And that was another part of that cultural piece. It's like something bad happening is not bad. It's how we respond to it that makes it good or bad, right?
Yeah, it's
Yeah, if you
you got to
take the example you
overreact
were
if yeah.
using, Van, with like frontline deliveries, whether that's, a Coca-Cola or Pepsi system or snacks
Yeah.
or other things, like the value bundle, what's being delivered is so much more than just the delivery, because there's the upkeep, there's the, chasing down things that were not delivered on time. There's a lot of things in the value bundle that beyond just the delivery, the order itself.
Right.
And I think the frontline employee, they have a trusted relationship, and they're a source of insights, like Ariel was saying, and there's so much more value from them for the CX than just on-time delivery.
That's
Mm-hmm.
right. That's what creates the connective tissue, if you will. That humanity, hey, AI might not be able to replicate that. Discussion for another day. So we're now into bonus time here. So Matt, do you have any closing thoughts for the team? Anything you'd like to share that kind of send
Well,
us on our way?
yeah, one thing that I think is a recurring theme that we've been talking about in this, just to tie a bow on it, is often you can find operational. I like to think there are three metrics we started the call talking about like outcome metrics, like what are business outcomes executives are aligned on. And there's also operational metrics and experience metrics. Experience metrics tend to be like what people are thinking, feeling, and saying, and they show up in your surveys and mine in your call center sentiment and things like that, and social media, and they're useful. And they can be a lagging indicator, though. Your operational metrics are really powerful and have been under leveraged. And I think what JP is hitting on is if you build insights and understand the operational metrics that matter, and Roseanne, for what you were talking about, those could be product quality metrics, right? That actually gives you a leading indicator that's more predictive in complement with your experience metrics. And then you can also start thinking about behaviors that you want and how would you measure them, right? So like that's a beyond just operational data that's normally occurring in your systems. How would you get data that indicates whether behaviors are happening? AI actually helps that. If you take the example of call centers or frontline employees where there's an email or a recorded call, you actually can measure whether behaviors occur.
That's right. That's right. So I'll leave everyone with my 2 cents, because I think something that Lynn mentioned is very, very important. We've all heard over the last several years, decades, about delighting the customers. But I think in Lynn's example, it's really about that bar isn't as high as you think. If you consistently meet their needs, it doesn't have to be wow and over the top. It just has to work. It's everything from, if I go into a restaurant, yeah, the wait staff can be great, but the food is why I'm there. If I think about my years in telecommunication, connectivity, like all things being equal, connectivity needs to happen. And so, the chair can't break, the mouse has to work. So these are quote unquote less sexy things. The bar seems low, but people will give you grace. Just make sure stuff works. And when it doesn't work, own it, fix it, and move on. You know, but and I think that's the important piece here, because those are your cultural and strategic imperatives, making sure we understand what does good look like, and more importantly, does everyone in the organization understand what good looks like. So with that said, I want to thank everyone for joining us here today. This has been a great discussion. Listen, tell your friends, tell your colleagues, this is where we come into the lab and come into the office hours for CX on the Rocks to have these sort of discussions, so that you can go back out to your business and have an immediate impact, not just information, transformation. All right, we'll talk to you soon.
Thank you,
Thanks,
JP.
everybody.
Thank you, Matt.
Thanks, JP. Thanks, everybody.
Have a great day.